Welcome everyone to today's Talking About podcast. I'm Adriana Neumann, a board certified behavior analyst, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Julia Rittenhouse and Hannah Shirey, both BCBAs as well. Today, we're diving into a topic that comes up often in conversations about applied behavior analysis, the misconceptions surrounding ABA. And before we go further, we do want to acknowledge something really important. These are not just myths. Many of these concerns people bring up are rooted in the real historical applications of our science. Hannah, I'd love for you to weigh in.
Of course. So when people share negative experiences with ABA, it's really not just a matter of misguided perception. The reality is that historically, ABA has been implemented in ways that prioritized compliance over autonomy, and practices sometimes ignored the individual's assent, or they even deliberately suppressed attempts to communicate those needs, such as saying no. Those choices left some individuals and families with harm rather than healing, unfortunately, and we have to face that directly and not sweep it under the rug.
Exactly. Julia, maybe you could touch on our historical roots of it to start us off.
Yeah, definitely. Historically, ABA interventions were often designed around eliminating behaviors like hand flapping, scripting, or avoiding eye contact, without any regard to why the individual engaged in them, or whether these behaviors were actually harmful. The focus was too often about making someone look more typical rather than making their life more fulfilling or more inclusive.
You're so right, Julia. And this came from a misunderstanding of what socially significant behavior should mean. Too often socially significant was interpreted as what society preferred instead of what was actually meaningful for that individual. And that's a really critical distinction.
Absolutely. Julia, would you mind sharing a little bit about our field's shift towards assent-based practice?
Absolutely. We've certainly seen a huge shift has been toward assent-based learning. We now recognize that the therapy can't just be about compliance. It actually has to be about participation and choice.
Exactly. And when we talk about assent, we mean that the individual actively shows willingness to participate. And that might look like smiling when entering a therapy space, or reaching for materials or toys, or even verbally just saying yes. But equally important, assent withdrawal matters just as much. So turning away, pushing materials aside, saying stop, that's all communication, and assent-based practice honors those responses instead of just overriding them for the sake of program fidelity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about shifting from how do I get this learner to complete my tasks to how do I create tasks that this learner values and willingly engages in.
So, Hannah, what would you say to our listeners to address some of these concerns directly?
So when critics say ABA is harmful or ABA is just compliance training, it's really important that we just don't dismiss that outright. Those statements often come from lived experiences where that was exactly how ABA was practiced. And we can't just say, well, that's not ABA anymore, and just move on. We really need to validate those concerns, acknowledge the harms that have been done, and then demonstrate in our daily practice today how ABA can look different when driven by assent and compassion.
Yeah, that's really true, Hannah, and that means building programs that reinforce communication, self-advocacy, and even autonomy, even when those behaviors conflict with what adults expect. For example, if a child says no, that refusal is honored. Teaching persistence or flexibility then looks like, how do we help them advocate, problem solve, or negotiate instead of suppressing their voice?
Those are really great points. Thank you. Before we wrap up, I would love to chat quickly about some practical steps to avoid repeating the past. Hannah, maybe you could start us off with your thoughts.
Absolutely. So some practical shifts that we have embraced can include embedding choice making into sessions. This can include really small details like choosing the order of activities or even selecting the materials. We also incorporate actively scripting and reinforcing those self-advocacy phrases like, I need a break, or I don't like this. We also want to try redefining treatment goals so that they align with what enhances the quality of life rather than just what quote unquote looks typical. And we also make sure we include clients and their families in those value-driven goals rather than just presenting a preset curriculum.
Yeah, and those are really great points. And professionally, it also means we have to continue growing, being open to critique, listening to the autistic and neurodivergent community, and making space for voices that have historically been silenced.
So, ABA has a history that we have to reckon with, right? And not deny. And truthfully, only by acknowledging the misapplications and harms can we prevent repeating them. So, the future of ABA isn't about compliance, right? It's about collaboration, helping individuals thrive on their own terms.
Exactly. And if we can continue to hold ourselves accountable, embracing assent-based practice and centering the individual, ABA actually remains a powerful science that can support human dignity and autonomy instead of undermining it.
I think that's beautifully said. Well, thank you so much for joining us today for this really important conversation. We hope that today's chat invites reflection, honesty, and a renewed commitment to doing better for our learners, for our families, and for our science. Thanks.